in the early 70s. And the idea of getting down in the chute and seeing what cattle were seeing, well, people thought, well, that's just kind of crazy. But I found that sometimes they'd balk at a shadow. One facility worked really well for vaccinating the cattle, another facility didn't work well at all, and all had to do with orientation of the sun. If there was a piece of chain hanging down, they'd balk at the piece of chain. You know, most people would just force the cattle through. And I'd look at the cattle and I'd say, well, they're stopping at the chain. And I can see the cattle's head go back and forth like this because he's looking at the chain. I don't know how many of you saw the HBO movie, but there's a scene in there where they put a metal slide in and ruined my design in the dip vat. Well, I have the same kind of entrance on center track restrainer system I designed for the big plants, and people take the ramp off. They say, well, we can just jam the cattle together. They don't see it. I'm learning more and more about how people have different kinds of minds. And there's kind of three different kinds of minds. There's a visual thinker like me who thinks in absolute photorealistic pictures. Then another kind of mind is a pattern thinker. This is more the mathematical kind of mind. These are kids that oftentimes have trouble with reading. And then you have a word thinker. Well, I'm not very good at the mathematical stuff, but I'm good at what they call object visual thinking. Like if someone says, think about a sunset, I see a very vivid picture. If someone says, think about your best friend, I can see your face. It's totally vivid. It totally is full of details. Now, one thing I'm always getting asked all the time is, do animals know they're going to get slaughtered? That's something I had to find out very early in my career. So I'd go down to the local swift plant and I'd watch how the cattle behaved. And then I would go back to the feed yard and watch how they behaved in the vaccinating chute. And they behaved the same way in both places. If they knew they were going to get slaughtered, they should have been jumping out. And the fences weren't all that high. They were only 5'6". Believe you me, those Arizona Brahma cross cattle, they could have jumped over that fence if they wanted to. But the thing is that they didn't. What they were afraid of is novelty. You know, some little chain hanging down, that's novel. Now, if you're in a dairy and there's a shadow or a sparkly reflection, well, the experienced cow, she just learns to walk right over that. But the new heifer, she's going to balk at that. The thing about new things is new things are both scary and attractive. They are attractive when the animal can voluntarily approach, and scary if you shove it in their face. Now, if I took an umbrella and I put it in the middle of the field, the cattle would come up and sniff it. But if the wind started to blow it away, then they would get scared and run away from it. And I used to call that curiously afraid. Well, the scientists actually have found the switch in the brain. They can switch the brain back and forth between seek or towards fear. And the thing that's kind of surprising is that the high fearful animal, this high strung animal like an Arab horse, would be the first one to walk up to the umbrella, but also would be the very first one to run away from it. In working with animals, we've got to work really, really hard to prevent fear memories. Animals will often associate something bad that happens to them with something they were either seeing or hearing right at the moment that it happened. In my book, I talk about the black hat horse. Well, during a veterinary procedure, someone had threw alcohol in his face. That was really, really awful. And he was looking right at the person's black cowboy hat. So now, black hats were bad. White hats were fine. White cowboy hats, no reaction. Black hat's bad. Now, I'm going to show you if I put a big black purse on my head, I probably would get the same reaction, because a big black purse would look very much the same. Animals also get afraid of the place where something bad happened. The common thing with dogs is to get afraid of the place where they were hit by a car. You know, what's called a place-specific fear. Sometimes in working in behavior problems, if you can figure out what caused the behavior problem and remove the thing he's afraid of. Let's give an example of a horse. Well, I had this lady say to me, well, my horse just goes berserk. Well, that's way too vague. I don't know what going berserk is. Does he buck when he changes gaits? Does he kick when you put the saddle on? Does he run away with you? What exactly does he do? I had to ask a whole lot of questions, because remember, the normal human mind drops out the details. Well, I finally found out that the only place this horse acted bad was when you put him in a cross ties. And she had gotten him when he was 3 years old. And he probably had an accident in the cross ties. I said, just stop using the cross ties. That's something where I can easily remove that thing from his life. Because one of the problems with the fear memories is They're very difficult to get rid of, especially in the high-strung, really nervous animals. Now, one question I get all the time is, do animals actually have emotion? Well, of course, anybody who's had a dog thinks that'd be kind of a ridiculous question. But we still have scientists that don't believe that animals have emotion. Recently, I just saw an email from a veterinarian that said, well, animals don't have emotional states. You can't write that in a paper on animal welfare because, you know, emotional states, they don't have them. But the thing that's really stupid about that is there's lots of research that shows very clearly that animals do have emotions. But most of that research is over in the neuroscience literature. The neuroscientists have known this for years. One of the big problems you have in science is nobody reads each other's stuff. You've got veterinarians have theirs, animal science has theirs, neuroscience has theirs, the ethologist has theirs. Well, I like to read stuff from many, 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 many different places. And there's a scientist named Jack Panskep, and Jack Panskep, he kind of identified 4 core emotions of fear, rage, separation distress. This is what happens when you leave the dog home alone and he eats up the house. You actually want to teach dogs to tolerate increasingly spending more time being alone. And then you have seeking. That's the urge to go out and explore. That's the urge that makes people go on expeditions to the moon and places like that. Then, of course, you got sex, you got play, and you got mother-young nurturing behavior. So, obviously, they do have emotions. You know, to say that they don't really seems pretty silly to me. Also, there are genetic differences in animal emotions. Like some animals are high fear, some animals are low fear. Some animals are high separation distress, other animals are lower separation distress. One thing I'm getting very, very concerned about today in dogs is socialization. One of the downsides of all the draconian leash laws, and believe you me, they're draconian. Cheryl, my assistant, takes her dog for a walk in the field by the church, and the bike cop came and got her, and $75 ticket. You know, dogs need to get socialized both on and off the leash, because when they're on the leash, the dog may perceive that as I have to protect my master. And when I'm off the leash, I can go play. It's also very important for dogs to learn that toddlers are people too. You can potentially get a very dangerous situation if you have a dog that is a puppy, has never learned to interact with toddlers and children. See, the problem is with all these rules about leash laws, to properly socialize a dog is real work. You got to take it down to the dog park and do all this stuff. When I was a child, all the dogs ran loose, and the good news is behavior problems were non-existent. And the bad news was lots of them got killed by cars. But they went out and they got socialized just on their own. And if a kid got bitten by a dog, the parents would go, "What did you do with it? What did you do to it? You did something to it." That's why he got bitten by the dog. Well, there is a problem we have today that we didn't have back, you know, when I was a kid, and that is people deliberately breeding dogs for aggressive traits. That is just a really bad thing, you know, and if you ban one breed, they'll just wreck another breed. Now, for years, in my cattle work, I thought if I could just build the perfect system, I could get rid of all the problems of mistreatment of cattle. What I found is I can only get rid of half of them, because the other half is management. One thing I've learned is people want the thing more than they want the management, because management's a whole lot of little details. It was very frustrating for me to build something really nice, and in the 70s and 80s, half my clients tore it up and wrecked it. The early 90s were pretty bad. And then there was a big turning point when I was hired by McDonald's and Wendy's and Burger King to implement their animal welfare auditing systems. And I've done the same thing with Whole Foods, where we measure the performance of a meat plant. I don't tell them how to build it, but in order to pass the audit, no more than 3 cattle out of 100 can moo and beller in the stunning area. More than 3 cattle out of 100 do any mooing up there, they fail the audit. You're only allowed 1 animal falling down. And the big plants we got here in Colorado, they're doing that. It's what's called an outcome-based measure. One of the problems in people designing auditing programs is they make them way too complicated. Way too much paperwork. Well, people fabricate and make up fake paperwork. I'm not into paperwork. I'm into what I can directly observe. You know, for aviation safety, I can sum up one mechanical thing in the airplane that I think needs to be examined all the time. One word: tail.